Let us go to the first puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Rook takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Here are checks in puzzle position. Rook to f1, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen to h2, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen to e1, check. The best move in puzzle position is king to h7. Rook takes pawn, check. Queen takes rook. Another one. The threats are bishop takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. Rook takes pawn, check. Rook takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. The checks are queen takes pawn, check. Rook takes pawn, check. Answer to this puzzle is bishop takes pawn. King to g1. Bishop takes pawn. Rook takes bishop. Rook to h3. Rook takes pawn, check. King takes rook. Queen to e7, check. Queen takes queen. Let's see the next puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Knight takes bishop. Checks in puzzle position are rook to f8, check. The answer is rook to f8, check. King to h7. Rook to e8. Next, here are the threats. Rook takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Queen takes bishop. Knight takes bishop. Here are checks in puzzle position. Bishop to h6, check. The answer is queen takes bishop. Queen takes queen. Knight takes queen. Pawn takes knight. Bishop to h6, check. Let us go to the next puzzle. Threats in this position are pawn takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Bishop takes queen. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes bishop. Bishop takes pawn. Checks in puzzle position are queen takes pawn, check. The puzzle is solved using bishop takes queen. Pawn takes bishop. Bishop to f4. One more. Here are the threats. Rook takes knight. Rook takes pawn. Rook takes pawn, check. Checks in puzzle position are queen to a7, check. Rook takes pawn, check. The puzzle is solved using rook takes knight. Rook takes rook. Queen to g6. Rook to f2. Queen to b1, check. King to h2. Rook takes rook. Next puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Queen takes queen. The checks are queen to d6, check. Queen to e5, check. Solution to the puzzle is queen takes queen. Pawn takes queen. King to f7. a4. King to e6. Another one. The threats are queen takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Queen to b2. f6. Queen takes knight. Another one. Here are threats in puzzle position. Rook takes rook. Knight takes pawn, check. Rook takes bishop. Queen takes rook, check. Queen takes bishop. The checks are rook to f2, check. Rook to e8, check. Knight takes pawn, check. Rook to e6, check. Queen to g4, check. Queen to e6, check. Queen to h5, check. Queen to h2, check. Queen to g2, check. Queen takes rook, check. The best move in puzzle position is knight takes pawn, check. King to d2. Rook to d8. Let's continue. Threats in puzzle position are queen takes bishop. Checks in this position are queen to d8, check. Bishop to h7, check. Answer to this puzzle is queen to c7. Queen to f4. Queen takes bishop. Next, the threats are bishop takes knight. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using bishop takes knight. Queen takes bishop. Rook to f1. Queen to e3. Bishop takes bishop. Let us go to the next puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Rook takes rook, check. The checks are rook takes rook, check. Solution to the puzzle is rook takes rook, check. King to h7. Bishop to h5. Let us go to the next puzzle. Threats in puzzle position are bishop takes pawn, check. Bishop takes pawn. Here are checks in puzzle position. Bishop takes pawn, check. Answer to this puzzle is bishop to d4. Queen takes bishop. Bishop takes pawn, check. King takes bishop. Rook takes queen. Another one. Here are the threats. Rook takes knight. Queen takes pawn, check. Here are the checks. Queen takes pawn, check. The best move in puzzle position is rook to f6. Queen takes rook. Queen takes queen. Let us go to the next puzzle. Here are the threats. Queen takes knight. Queen takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. Solution to the puzzle is knight takes pawn. Queen to e6. Queen takes knight. Queen takes queen. Knight to e7, check. King to h7. Knight takes queen. Let's continue. The threats are queen takes rook. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using queen takes rook. Knight takes queen. Bishop takes queen. One more. Threats in puzzle position are queen takes knight. Queen takes pawn, check. Rook takes pawn. Checks in this position are queen takes pawn, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Knight to d4. Knight to h3, check. Pawn takes knight. Queen takes queen, check. Pawn takes queen. Next, threats in this position are rook takes bishop. Queen takes bishop. Queen takes rook, check. Queen takes pawn. The checks are queen takes rook, check. Answer to this puzzle is rook takes bishop. c3. Rook takes rook, check. Queen takes rook. Queen to b5. c4. Queen to d7. One more. The threats are queen takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes knight. Bishop takes knight. There are no checks in this position. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Knight takes knight. Bishop takes knight. Bishop takes bishop. Next puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Bishop takes knight. Queen takes pawn, check. Rook takes knight. Here are the checks. Queen takes pawn, check. The answer is rook takes knight. Bishop takes rook. Bishop takes pawn, check. King takes bishop. Queen takes queen. Another puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Rook takes pawn, check. Rook takes knight. Queen takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Bishop takes rook. Here are the checks. Rook takes pawn, check. The best move in puzzle position is bishop takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. Bishop takes rook. Bishop to h3. Rook to d8. Let's see the next puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Queen takes rook. Queen takes pawn. Knight takes pawn, check. Knight takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Queen to d8, check. Queen to e8, check. Queen to f8, check. Queen to d7, check. Queen to e6, check. Queen to c7, check. Queen to b7, check. Knight takes pawn, check. Knight to f5, check. The best move in puzzle position is knight takes pawn, check. King to f6. Queen takes rook, check. Another puzzle. Here are the threats. Pawn takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. The checks are rook to d2, check. Rook to b1, check. The answer is rook to d2, check. Rook takes rook. King takes rook. Pawn takes pawn. King takes pawn. f2. King to e2. Promotes to rook. King takes rook. Let's continue. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are pawn takes bishop. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Checks in puzzle position are queen takes pawn, check. The answer is queen takes pawn, check. King to h1. Rook to d8. Let's see the next puzzle. Threats in this position are queen takes pawn, check. Checks in this position are queen to b6, check. Queen takes pawn, check. The answer is promotes to queen. Queen takes queen. Queen takes queen. Promotes to queen. Queen to h8, check. King to g6. Queen takes queen. Thank you for watching, please like and subscribe.